We all lost during the Biden years because we had a president who wasn't mentally fit.
Not great in the pocket.
No, he was not. There was nothing going on in the pocket. There was nothing in the pocket.
He was mentally out of pocket.
He was out of pocket. And what's happened is that the House Oversight Committee has continued to probe and go down that list of people who should have let us know that we had our presidency on autopilot. And here's what's happening next. On Friday, Andrew Bates, who's the former deputy assistant of the president, he's going to be interviewed. Karine Jean-Pierre on September 12th. She was, of course, the White House press secretary. She should have known what was going on. And then on September 18th, Jeff Zients, former White House chief of staff. Here's Charlamagne the God talking to a DNC chair, Jaime Harrison, another person who should have known what was going on, criticizing him for being one of the people on that long list of Democrats who didn't want to tell the truth. Watch.
If I'm the DNC chair, what power do I have to pick? Like, people say, well, you could have told Joe Biden to not run. Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Yo,
you could have said that.
I could have.
Nobody was against him during that time.
You could have and should have.
You're
not beholden to them no more.
No, it's not about being beholden to them. I'm telling you the truth.
That man was too old. Everybody knew he was too old.
But Charlamagne,
he should have been a transitional president from the beginning.
Charlamagne, I get all of that. I get all of that. But you know what? Somebody should have stepped up. If people thought that Joe Biden was too old, then some real people should have stepped up and said, you know what, I'm going to run.
That guy had not interacted with President Biden. I mean, he's the DNC chair.
Yeah, and I think what is evident now is that this is going to be a problem that bleeds far past, conservatives or Republicans complaining about it. It goes to the heart of the credibility of all these people. And the thing that is really important to remember, Joe Biden may have been like ushered out into the sunset, but everybody around him thinks they still have political careers, are still involved in our politics. And if these people propped somebody up who was completely mentally gone in order to protect their own power, that's a real problem going forward.
There's a real headline in that clip there that kind of goes beyond President Biden. So that was the DNC chair, and his words are, if people thought he wasn't capable, then somebody should have stepped up.
Right.
Where did RFK Jr. come from? Did he not try to run in a primary? There was a Democrat congressman, I don't remember his name right now, tried to run in a primary. There were multiple people that stepped up from within the Democrat Party. And we're talking about a Kennedy, tried to run in a primary and let the Democrats see what his message was. And it was none other than the DNC that shut that down, that said, no, we're not doing that. Joe Biden's our guy. He's sitting there going, well, should I have told the president that I don't think he should run? Well, you're kind of trying to prove a negative there, because what you did do was you went out and told every donor and voter, this is our guy. He's great. There's nothing wrong here. Give us your money. Give us your votes. And I'll tell you, it doesn't take a political insider to watch an interview like that and say, there's no way I can support this party.
Well,
These people are crazy.
Open, dirty little secret that everybody in D.C. knew. And it was also, you saw that footage there of, the president off on some European trip that he took, and that's the one where he wandered off, and Giorgia Meloni had to bring him back in. But he had incidents at the Vatican. He had lots of foreign affairs where it was on display. And that's where it really got dangerous, because the people in other countries understood that he was not in charge. Right. And so the question is, who was in charge? So that's a two-part thing here, right? Who knew that he was mentally, not with it and on autopilot, that the government was on autopilot? And then who was running it?
Right.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.